Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for this webinar on talent pipeline management. My name is Nikki Da Silva with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation, and we're delighted to have you with us to learn a little bit more about TPM, or talent pipeline management, and how you can get involved in it. Later in the program, we'll be joined by 3 of our TPM practitioners who will talk about why they decided to use TPM and how it's helped them to address their workforce challenges. So to get started, I wanted to tell you all a little bit about what is talent pipeline management and why was it created. So TPM is really built on supply chain practices that employers are familiar with, and it's meant to help address many of the challenges that employers have, whether that's around being able to address retention issues, turnover issues, diversity issues, whatever their biggest pain points are, and really bridging the gap between employers and their education and training partners. So the diagram you're seeing here on the screen is kind of one of the examples we use to show where this process came from. So in traditional supply chain management, you have kind of raw materials that go through a process, and there's value being added at each component of that process based on the end customer specifications. I like to use the example of building a Tesla because that's a really easy one to go with. So if somebody were to go on the website and tell Tesla, I want to buy a car, this model, a specific color, they want it to have particular features, and that it will be shipped to a specific place at a specific time. Tesla then takes all that information back to the beginning of their supply chain and gets all of the materials and builds the car based on that end customer specifications. You can think about some components of that being applied in the workforce system. Not to say that learners or workers are widgets, but there's some value to think about employers as playing an end customer role and being able to provide information about what their needs are back through the talent pipeline process or supply chain. So back to education and workforce partners through a common language of which they can then respond to effectively with the right training and experiences for workers and learners, and back to the workers and learners themselves in a way in which they can ensure that they're taking the right steps forward and that they're going to be prepared for the jobs that are available to them in the workforce. Talent pipeline management is made up of 6 strategies within the framework. And within each one of these strategies, we're really trying to answer a particular question. So with strategy 1, we're really helping employers understand kind of what their biggest pain points are, what's really keeping them up at night or not allowing them to be able to maintain business success if they don't address this problem. Based on that, what is their projected demand? How many people do they need and where in those critical jobs? How are we communicating what the skills and competencies are for those particular roles? And where are we currently getting our talent? From there, in strategy 5, we start thinking about how we're able to really build our talent supply chains and create solutions through a co-design process with our education and training partners, and how we're measuring potential success and performance within those solutions. From there, we enter into continuous improvement, which is pretty self-explanatory in this sense, but really what are the opportunities for improvement based on the solutions that have been put in place. So you can think about this as in kind of maybe 4 areas, right? We want to help employers really get organized around what their biggest pain points are, what they're going to focus on, really help them in getting the facts straight and collecting the data that's needed, and really allowing employers to kind of lead this process by what their data is telling them, develop the implementation and solutions around it, and then have the framework to be able to improve upon those practices moving forward. So how we've been able to teach people about this framework or methodologies through what we call our TPM Academies. So we typically bring together groups of people and communities or nationally in in these TPM Academy programs. To date, we've had 26 cohorts with people being trained in 44 states, including Canada, or in addition to Canada, DC, and somebody from Colombia. And we have at this point, over 800 practitioners, people who've been trained in this methodology. And like I mentioned, you'll get to hear from a few of our practitioners in just a moment, as well as thousands of employers that have been involved in these employer collaborative groups along the way. So traditionally, our TPM Academy program has been in person, mostly up until this point. But what we heard from a lot of our existing TPM practitioners or people who have gone through the training and those that were interested in it is that we needed to be able to expand access to this training beyond just the in-person component, and provide a way for people to be able to be recognized for their learning. So we looked at how we could professionalize it, increase access, and improve flexibility in learning the TPM framework. And that's where we came up with TPM CoLab. So this is our online learning platform that allows people to be trained in the TPM framework and connect with your peers, as well as the opportunity to get a digital badge for your learning. So what does this look like? If you were to participate in the TPM Academy online through our learning management platform, you would sign up for a course, and then you would access your dashboard, and you'd be able to see the different components for your learning. One of the great things about this too is that the learning is focused based on your role. So whether you're going to be playing the role of somebody who is leading a group of employers through this process, so maybe you're coming from a chamber of commerce or an industry association, you're really playing that business role or business intermediary role. Whether you're an employer that's looking at being able to implement this methodology internal to your company or with a group of employers externally, or if you're a provider partner who really wants to look at repurposing your employer engagement strategy beyond an advisory capacity and having better alignment of your programming to more employer-led career pathways. So in that sense, you would identify which role that you would be playing in a talent supply chain, and then you would be able to enroll in the TPM Academy that fits what you plan to do. So you would make the decision on your audience that you are, and then how you want to learn. So we have two different options for that. Either self-paced, means you'll do all of your coursework on your own, or you have the option to join one of our blended learning cohorts. So that means you would do your kind of theory learning on your own through the e-learning modules, and then about 8 times over 12 weeks, you would meet with a group of your peers and 2 of our TPM faculty members. So these are practitioners that have proven success in the field, who have now been able to reach a level where they're teaching and facilitating these academies. And you would meet with them around each one of the different strategies in order to reinforce your learning, get some real world application, discussion, and exercises. So how the course is broken down, just as I mentioned before, is that you would do kind of your self-paced study for each one of the programs. If you choose to do a blended learning version, then you would meet with your cohort. And then we have additional components to really help you round out your learning. So you have the opportunity to connect with your peers. I mentioned that there are over 800 people that have been I apologize, I just realized I was not advancing the slides. So as I mentioned earlier, we have 3 different audiences that you can fit into, whether you're playing that host organization role, an employer role, or a provider role, and that you can choose which method of learning you have, whether it's self-paced or blended. And just to recap what I was just previously speaking about is that your learning would be broken into self-paced study around those e-learning units that include the strategy theory component. And if you were to choose to do so in the blended learning option, then you would meet for those virtual instructor-led training sessions around each strategy, plus the additional support that everyone gets around being able to connect with your peers, access to our different resources and job aids, which I'll show you a couple examples here in a minute, and different events that we hold throughout the year for our National Learning Network, which is our professional network of those 800 plus practitioners I mentioned. So you would do that for each one of the strategies that we mentioned on the front end, and that would allow you to take our summative assessment where you could get a digital badge that would allow you to be recognized as a talent supply chain manager. So I referenced that we have a variety of different resources. There are resources and templates throughout the learning of how you can conduct different meetings, how you can collect the data, examples from previous practitioners of how they've done some of this work, case studies and exercises, as well as action plans for each one of the strategies to help you really build what your implementation strategy for this kind of framework could be. And then, as mentioned, the demonstration of your digital badge, of your learning and receiving the digital badge. You would be able to do that as well at the end of the training. So if interested, we have as I mentioned, two different options for you, both that on-demand learning where you can do it fully self-paced on your own, or our blended learning cohort. Our next cohort starts on June 20th. And you can sign up either by going to collab.tpmacademy.org or by clicking on the QR code you see on your screen and enrolling in that blended learning course. If you stick around to the end of the webinar, you'll be able to get a special discount code for enrolling in either one of those courses, but we will provide that code after you get to hear from 3 of our practitioners on the upcoming panel. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Nikki. Much of the TPM initiative success is due to our partners who have been through our TPM Academy trainings and are involved in our employer collaboratives that use the TPM framework. These partners make up, as Nikki said, the TPM National Learning Network, partners just like you who are facing lots of talent challenges in their communities and are eager to engage employers in a more impactful, data-driven process to overcome what plagues our workforce. So I'm pleased today to be joined by 3 of these colleagues who represent our 3 most common colleagues who participate in the TPM Academy. A host organization, those who help orchestrate employer collaboratives through the TPM framework, an employer participating in a collaborative, and an education training partner. All of these partners are absolutely essential to a successful talent supply chain. So I'm very happy that these folks could get to join us. So let's start to get to know them a little bit better. I'm going to start with Priscilla. Priscilla, please introduce yourself and tell us how you're connected to talent pipeline management, including if you've participated in a TPM Academy and your involvement with the TPM National Learning Network.
Sure. Thank you, Jamie, and thank you everyone for who's tuning in and interested in TPM. My name is Priscilla Camacho. I am the Chief Legislative, Industry, and External Relations Officer for the Alamo Colleges District. Sounds like a mouthful, but basically handle all government relations at a local, state, and federal level, along with industry partnerships. And my involvement and engagement with TPM started back in my former role with the San Antonio Chamber of Commerce as their VP of Education and Workforce. I went through cohort number 1 of the TPM Academy, and since that time have been pleased to see its now implementation in our community and the impact it's having within our own community college district here in San Antonio. And so since that time, been engaged in numerous programming, attended plenty of conferences and including the fellows training. So definitely encourage those who are online or interested to definitely participate.
Thanks so much, Priscilla. We're glad to have you on here. And for those of you on the call, our TPM Fellows is our esteemed group of leaders who help the U.S. Chamber Foundation really think about the future direction of talent pipeline management. So we're very happy to have Priscilla among that group, as well as Corey. Corey, please introduce yourself.
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Corey Melton. I am Vice President of Membership and Talent Development at the Greater Tallahassee Chamber of Commerce. We started TPM back at the very beginning of COVID, so 2020. And I have been through actually 3 different cohorts. So I was in cohort 12, which was the initial one. I was in the pilot cohort for CoLab, which you're going to be, or you have learned about today, and we'll be talking about some more. And then I've also actually hosted 2 academies here in Florida for our local folks who are interested in taking a deeper dive into being part of the TPM in the TPM work here in Tallahassee. So we have 2 collaboratives local to Tallahassee, one in healthcare, one in technology. We are looking to implement a 3rd one in manufacturing this year. And I also am a TPM fellow and faculty, so I get to help teach the courses sometimes and help do lead the exercises. But like Priscilla, I encourage you to definitely take advantage of it. There's a lot to learn. We're always learning.
And of course, in the spirit of TPM, where would we be without our employers? So Sonia, please introduce yourself. Glad to have you here.
Thank you so much. I'm Sonia Bergman. I'm Chief People Officer at Appalachian Regional Healthcare. We are the largest employer in Eastern Kentucky, and in our region, we have 14 hospitals between Southeast Kentucky and Southern West Virginia, with about 6,500 team members. As an employer, we started participating in the Kentucky Chamber-sponsored talent pipeline in 2018 in the Healthcare Collaborative. It was new to us, but it's really been an exciting and beneficial process. And we're excited to share with you today about just what a wonderful opportunity it's been for us as an organization. So thank you for having us.
This is an awesome group. I know we're going to have a great discussion. Before we get to it, I just want to let the audience know that there will be an opportunity for audience question and answer. Please feel free to start to enter your questions into the chat, and we will certainly address them towards the end of the discussion. But Corey, we're going to go ahead and start with you. You've had a lot of experience now with the framework, as you said, going through multiple TPM academies, but then also overseeing as a host organization, multiple collaboratives yourself. For you, those that are just learning the TPM framework, what about TPM stands out compared to other workforce development approaches you've either tried or are familiar with?
Sure. So I think the number one thing that makes TPM so different is really how it is authentically employer-led. So when we first bring this group of employers together, many times there are competitors in the room. They're very unsure. It feels different because there aren't others in the room, like some of our educators and other people that they expect to be there, that they work with all the time. And so we bring them in the room together and we're like, it's you. And we're just trying to get them organized, getting them accustomed to being able to work together. And then they come up with not only what their pain points are, but what success looks like. So when they start to see the results of their own work, and then we start doing the data gathering, and that information is coming back, it is directly from the employers. It's not things that are projections based on what they think might happen. It is actually from their mouths. They start to get excited because this is their data, and this is what they are telling the rest of the workforce system, whether it's the workforce boards or the educators or the community organizations that are part of it. But I think that employer-led component is by and far probably the thing that sets this apart from most other workforce related situations.
Thanks, Corey. You touched on a really important point there about this being an employer-led effort and the role that data plays. So I'm going to go to Sonia next, but one thing that I want to encourage folks to acknowledge about TPM is that we really emphasize the use of that primary labor market information coming directly from the employers that are participating in these collaboratives, but we're doing that in a way that protects the employer's individual proprietary information, because we know that that is a concern that employers have as they think about these collaboration opportunities. So Sonia, would love to turn to you, and just from an employer's perspective, can you give us a little bit of an understanding of what do you see as the advantages as an employer who has participated in an employer collaborative of using the TPM framework, and what compelled you to participate, maybe addressing some of what Corey touched on in terms of that competition coming to the table with folks that you're used to going up against, perhaps.
Sure, Jamie. I think from an employer, just the better understanding of how businesses and education can partner together. I think that was to help. We're all on the same. We all have the same recurring issues, and so for us to come together and help solve workforce crisis in our state was just a great opportunity for us as an employer, and being part of the healthcare collaborative. You know, we share real data. The data was really eye-opening to us, and to realize, we had state data, but then also just looking in our region about, workforce opportunities in our region. So the data was real. I think it was very eye-opening to us. And then breaking down the competitive walls, there were healthcare employers that probably had never been together under the same roof. So our joke was, and we joke amongst each other about, we all came into that room that day with hard hats on, but we left as team members. So we've all got the same common goal: how to improve and increase our workforce through talent pipeline. So in regards to data, also, I mentioned how eye-opening the vacancies and the workforce needs that we had. But when we started drilling down, together as employers, we invited education partners to the table. We talked about, where are our needs? What are the barriers? We let them know, I think they probably were aware, but the huge registered nurse shortage that we were experiencing. So we worked together. We talked about what we could do for potential workforce, how we could overcome it. And employers were on the table with educators saying, we'll help you. What can we do to help develop, to help upskill, the pipeline for us as employers? So really it was, I think, just really important for us to just come together mostly and talk about what kind of opportunities that we had. And I may have not addressed what enticed us to join the TPM. I think we all knew at the time we were experiencing significant workforce shortage. We had a very participative state chamber, and then also I will say that our senior pipeline manager, Sarah Tracy, who I've been with over the last several years, was very influential to us as an employer. But she has guided us together. And so I think that, we were so thankful once we made the decision to work together with the talent pipeline.
That's awesome, Sonia. And yes, major shout out to our colleagues at the Kentucky Chamber, including Sarah Tracy, who I'm sure is listening in, but have done such a phenomenal job with TPM implementation across the state and finding incredible employer champions such as yourself. And I'm so glad that you reference the education and training partner. I'm eager to get to Priscilla, but I want to just provide our audience a little bit more clarity of what implementation looks like before I do that. So Corey, can you provide for us a little bit more understanding about what does implementation look like from the context of your employer collaboratives that you host in Tallahassee?
Sure. So for us, as I mentioned, we started in the middle of COVID. So it's probably a little different than it would be today, but essentially it's the same. And it starts by talking to your employers. You can do that as a group of employers. I actually ended up doing individual calls with the ones who I wanted to initially bring together to see if this was of interest to them. So talking with the employers, helping them understand what TPM is and what TPM is not. And then you actually just get them together in the room. You start having the conversation. And as Nikki mentioned earlier, that first strategy is really just, what is keeping you up at night? What is it that we want to work on? What issue is keeping you from performing to the level that you think you should be? And somewhere in there's a commonality. So, for instance, in our healthcare one, as Sonia mentioned, RNs was a big one because that is something that all of our healthcare providers needed. But more than that, at that particular point in time, they needed certified medical assistants. So getting them to have that conversation about what's going on, what actually is the most urgent need, and getting them to agree on that is the first spot. And then you use a web tool that's provided by TPM to start collecting that data that Jamie was talking about. So over the next year or two, how many of these certified nursing assistants do you think you're going to need? How many do you expect to be retiring? How many are leaving for other reasons? So now you're starting to collect data that they may or may not have been looking at, certainly not as a group, but even individually. So you're collecting that data. As Jamie mentioned, it is very much only reported out in the aggregate. So we're looking at the total group, so we can really see where the need is. And when you bring that back to them, a lot of times they are surprised by the amount, the sheer numbers that are needed, even with this small group. So you walk them through that data collection. So again, it's the projections first, and then walking them through where they're getting their talent and what their talent needs to look like. And then you start working on the supply chain. But that initial piece is just bringing those people together. The other kind of surrounding thing that we did in our area, which I also recommend, is bringing in a wider group of people beyond your employers, just to let them know what TPM is, let them know that they will become part of the solution. But at that initial meeting, those initial data gathering pieces is just the employers. So whether it's elected officials or your workforce board, educators, other community organizations, it's good for them to know and be supportive of the end goal, because they will be part of that as the process continues. But I also want to mention here that TPM is not a start and end. If you'll notice, everything in TPM is a circle, and that's because it's ongoing. So we started in 2020. We are still progressing through, and we might have gone around that circle for the medical assistants. Now we're going through that same circle for licensed practical nurses. So it's an ongoing working relationship with your employers, your community organizations, your workforce boards, and your educators. So there's really a role for everyone. That's kind of how we got started for both of our collaboratives.
Thanks, Corey. And we're really excited that not only do we have a case study written about Corey's IT collaborative that you can learn more about that's currently available, but we will have a case study released later this week about their healthcare collaborative and some of the incredible work that they have done to really assess the prioritized skills and making sure that we are really creating open and accessible pathways to people who might not have been able to dedicate 1,300 clinical hours and trying to make sure that we are reducing quantity of hours, but not necessarily the quality of what happens over the course of those clinical hours for those very important healthcare positions. Sonia, would love to hear from you just a little bit about the implementation work that has taken place in Kentucky with the Kentucky Chambers Healthcare Collaborative you're a part of.
Sure. I think, as you mentioned, the partnerships have been a huge, tremendous force in improving workforce opportunities. One thing I would like to share today is that we are pleased, that the state chamber, one thing that we really liked is that they made industry-specific talent pipeline collaboratives, which really was important to us to talk about. Although we like the bourbon and distillery industry, healthcare has a total different look. So being industry specific was I think opportunistic for us. But pleased to announce that the Kentucky Hospital Association and the Kentucky Chamber are coming together to help workforce. And the Kentucky Hospital Association is building a team of 5 pipeline managers across our state that will work directly with hospitals to address workforce challenges. So having the State Hospital Association come on board to realize the issues and the opportunities for a talent pipeline, we feel like is a huge support just from a state standpoint. I think these managers will work with Kentucky Hospital members and also with educators to talk about how they can provide training and assistance to just help build pipelines for healthcare careers in Kentucky. So that's super exciting news for us.
No, I'm so excited about that announcement. It's absolutely incredible to see the growth of TPM over time and the work that you all have done to upskill and reskill your existing workforce while also trying to prepare the future workforce, which is why that partnership with education and training providers is absolutely critical. So I'm so happy that Priscilla has joined us. You now bring this really interesting perspective, as you mentioned, having previously been with the chamber and now sitting on the educator side. So would love for you to share with us from your perspective, knowing both ends, but thinking about your education and training provider hat, if you have that on, what do you see as the benefit for educators if employers are going through this TPM process?
Thanks. No, it is interesting to have the dual hat, and frankly, it's beneficial at a critical time here, especially in Texas. And so, we as education and training providers, community colleges being one of the largest across the nation, we're looking for that data, that information. We don't want to have programs, any kind of training program, that isn't resulting in students getting a job at the end of it. I mean, without the job, why are we having the program? And that's something that we, as a system ourselves, and then at a statewide level, have been very conscious about making sure that we have. And apologies for the background noise. I'm in a cubicle kind of space, and so we've got a lot of that going on in this area. But one of the things that we are very concerned about and wanting to focus in on is making sure that students have that job. And so for us, things like TPM collaboratives, industry specific, are very helpful because they get us that ready time data that we need to be able to not only continue programs, but then put programs to bed that maybe are not beneficial or not needed anymore, and start new programs that maybe potentially are going to be capital intensive. And that's something that we're very conscious about. The other thing I did want to mention, and why it's so important and critical, these kinds of collaboratives in Texas, is our community college funding system is going to rapidly change actually in the next couple of months due to legislation that just passed this past legislative session. We're very excited. We're moving from what is really a semester credit hour based funding system to now an outcomes based funding system where we will be rewarded for students who complete credentials of value in high demand industries, if they are transferring to four-year universities, and if they are actually also potentially into our dual credit programs as we continue to expand those, are they actually completing 15 semester credit hours or more? And so when you think about all of those things, we want our students to be able to get those credentials of value, but then also be able to, create programs that are sustainable because we're going to be receiving funding from the state for that. And so for us, it's a win-win. Students achieve, and then we will also be able to receive sustainable state funding in Texas now, moving to this kind of outcomes incentive-based system.
Yeah, that's great insight. And you touched on an important principle of TPM, like just like in supply chain management, all partners are meant to benefit. So although this is an employer-led effort, it's not as if it's employers alone, and they are not the only ones that will see that return on investment. So it's great to see that there's some policy alignment of trying to ensure that all partners benefit. So that's really helpful. Sonia, from your perspective, you had mentioned, the importance of education and training provider partnerships. Could you give us a little bit more information about what, if any, changes have been made in terms of your partnerships with those education and training providers since you participated in the employer collaborative?
Sure. We've definitely strengthened our partnership, both regional and I think across the state, and with educators. I think being able to be transparent about our challenges and what our barriers were, we've worked together to try to overcome those, and mostly having an end goal of improving and growing our workforce. One of the examples I'll give you all is that when we first started gathering our data about how many registered nurses that we needed in our region, we met with educators and we talked for several hours about how we can, what are the barriers, how can we assist them. We also talked about, for example, in regards to registered nurses, how state or educators were limited on the slots that they could provide, which was governed by the state, the Board of Nursing, how many slots you could provide as an educator. So what we did was try to help them. We met with the Kentucky Board of Nursing as well. So they were another partner to help them understand, we've got this great need. What can we all do together to try to meet those needs? So, I think we're now friendly workforce advocates working together. We're meeting regularly with employers, not only in our region, but across the state. But it's definitely improved our partnership for sure.
I'm sure they can appreciate getting to hear from multiple employers at once, kind of singing from the same song sheet, as opposed to having to host, 20 different conversations that would probably look very similar, but also might be some nuances here and there that would be difficult to interpret and then result in different programs. Can't necessarily create different programs for each and every single employer for the same role. So glad to hear that those improvements have happened. But I think that a lot of education and training partners are used to being at the table for all of these conversations with employers, right? Whether it's through advisory boards or other public-private partnerships that exist, they're used to getting to hear everything that employers are willing to share in those larger group conversations. So Priscilla, my next question is for you, and your dual hat here is probably helpful, but for those that would play the role of host organization of facilitating employer collaboratives, what is your advice for them in how they communicate with education training partners to say, hey, you're not going to be at every single one of these data collection conversations, but you are going to be brought into the process? How would you navigate those waters?
I think being honest. I've said this, I think, on a few panels now that I've been on. You have to be completely forthcoming and honest with all of your partners. And bearing in mind, another reality is that while us as a community college district, or even in your ISDs, if you're working predominantly with high schools, they are not just training providers, they are also employers themselves. And in fact, here in our community, we have identified the industry of teaching and needing more teachers. I know there is just a national shortage. We've talked about nursing a great bit, but teachers are also in short supply. And so when you have that reality and you have that dual role, you have to let them know that as a training provider, they're going to have to wait a little longer before they come to the table with the employers to hear the information needed for maybe cybersecurity or for construction. But I think remembering that they're also going to probably be an employer you're going to need to talk to and work with, giving them that heads up, like, we're going to be working with you as well in this space. Give us a moment so that we can work on these industry collaboratives, and then we will come to you as the partner for the training provider partner in these, and then also further as an employer later on for this particular demand. I mean, as a community college, we also hire cybersecurity professionals and a lot of the trades professions we have to have in-house. And so I think that there's some of that tension sometimes, because you're right, we always have had a seat at the table. We've always been at the starting point. But I think giving them that real line, kind of real life conversation and time to know when they will be engaged is helpful. I think the other piece of it too is making sure that you don't discount them right away. I think sometimes training providers, particularly your faculty and staff that are normally are in the weeds of this kind of work, will get insulted sometimes and maybe take it personally that they're not being engaged right away. That's where I think, and for those who are maybe in that training provider realm that are on the call right now listening in, I would highly encourage you to have your folks engage in this process, or learn about the process. Because one of the things internally I've started to recognize and see is, because TPM is being implemented in our community, more and more of our workforce development staff members and team members have really begun to understand and are now talking TPM verbiage, are starting to think about how do we work on these programs to be more employer focused and employer centered versus, I think, some of the language and sentiment before TPM was really well known and really being implemented in our community. And so I think that that's one of the sort of unintended but yet positive consequences of it in terms of, for us as a provider, it's allowed us to sort of sit back and think, okay, we can focus on our role as a training provider. We're going to get this information. It's going to be more focused. It's going to be industry specific. It's going to be specific to potentially just that occupation. And that helps us with our program deployment. It helps us with our students. It helps us just overall with our community partnerships. And so that's something that I think from our end, always honest conversations are the best. Don't wait till the middle to do that. Do it at the front end.
Yeah, I think that one of my favorite ways of thinking now is transparency equals trust, right? So the more transparent we can be on the front end about the process and how people benefit from the process, that's what leads to building those trusting relationships. It's a critical element of a successful TPM implementation. So love that you touched on that. So I want to get to audience Q&A pretty quickly because you guys are asking some good questions from the audience. But before I do that, I have one more question for Corey and then one more for all of you. Corey, I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about your TPM Academy experience via CoLab. Would you share a little bit about what that was like, especially since you've seen both versions of the Academy experience? I would love for you to touch on that.
Sure. I actually feel like I've had all versions from completely virtual to partly virtual. But yeah, so with the CoLab, what I do love about CoLab is that you can go at your own pace. I actually did the blended version. So we would do the coursework on our own home desk. It doesn't matter. Get all of that squared away, answer the questions. But then we had a chance to come together, and I know how much everybody loves role playing. But it's not all role playing, but it is exercises that you work through together in a group. And it really does give you an opportunity to have some real world questions about TPM, everything from what are you going to do first to, here's the information that came back. What are you going to do with it? So I loved having that interaction with the other, not only the other participants, but also with the mentors and the TPM faculty there that are there to give you not just guidance, but because they all have done their own TPM collaboratives, they can give you real world examples of the things you're talking about. And a lot of time, that's what I felt like I needed was just that, you'd read the section or you'd study it online, and then you would think to yourself, well, for example, that would look like what? And that's to me what the in-person piece brought to it. So I loved CoLab. Also love the in-person, so I think you can't go wrong with either one. But I think both are great alternatives, especially if you're working at it on your own time and maybe it doesn't quite align with some of the set collaboratives that are starting, or cohorts, that are starting.
Yeah, two very important points that led us to the creation of TPM CoLab in the first place. So I really appreciate that perspective. So my last question before I go to the audience Q&A is, in y'all's perspective, who do you think should become engaged with TPM in terms of learning the framework? Who is that best suited for? Why don't I start with Sonia first?
Well, I would definitely say all employers, large or small, does not matter your size or how many of employees or even what your workforce opportunities are. But I think just the networking and the partnership, we all know across the country, it's not just in healthcare. I know I've talked a lot about that today, but workforce shortages are real. And just being able to share and brainstorm, think tank, whatever you want to call it, but coming together, and then the employers, the educators, I think as well, just because we are trying to grow, upskill the students of our region. So I highly recommend your involvement.
Awesome. Corey, how about you next?
Sure. I say that, there are so many people that should be part of it, especially in the cohort of the academy itself. But I would say chambers of commerce are like a natural fit for this. Economic development, workforce boards, community organizations, definitely your educators, but you also can think of some of your non-traditional education partners. So for instance, in Tallahassee, our Goodwill of the Big Bend offers all kinds of courses and training opportunities and brings a really great way for us to bring in some of those opportunity populations that we might not always think about when we think about potential candidates. So I like to really think outside the box, think about anybody who might be touching the program once you've started. So people who can help with wraparound services. It's sometimes just people who need to be a champion. They need to be able to support the work you're doing. So it could be elected officials or city, county staff. But I think it's important that everyone is on that same page. Again, technical colleges, community colleges. There's really no wrong answer, but definitely those.
Yeah, I really appreciate you touching on the opportunity populations as well, because something that we're able to offer in TPM CoLab is specialty learning content. So you can learn the core framework that Nikki presented on, but then if you're thinking about the application in very specific contexts, then we are developing specialty content in those learning areas so that you can get on the bandwagon of lifelong learning, even in the context of talent pipeline management, and enroll in those courses as well, so that you're bringing in that perspective of, if I'm really focusing on trying to advance my workforce and diversify my workforce for those that typically experience barriers to education and employment, then this is a way for me to move that work forward and really put some teeth on it. So thanks so much for referencing that as well. Priscilla, certainly last but not least.
I'm going to say ditto to everything that was already said, because I think everything's been covered, but I would maybe change my answer in one way, in that, because there's a lot of folks that should join and should be a part of the movement and should really participate. But I think I would say, when you come into it with an open mind and an open perspective, that you're going to have to potentially change the way you operate. I think that's true of the employers, your community-based organizations, and certainly training providers. There is going to be some moment where you're going to realize that you have to alter the way you've traditionally done things. And frankly, if we haven't already figured that out during COVID, I don't know where y'all have been, because everyone's had to alter their way of thinking and way of doing things since COVID really sort of hit us all in the face in terms of workforce development. How are we hiring? How are we retaining talent? Where are we finding talent? And I really did appreciate that last comment about opportunity programs for those individuals who maybe have been left behind in the past, particularly those who don't have a GED and need that high school diploma or high school equivalency exam, those who have been formerly incarcerated. I mean, it's great to finally see programming and laws coming into play to really help, particularly formerly incarcerated individuals, to finally help them get back into society, get really good jobs, get high-paying jobs, so that they don't go back to jail, so that they don't go back into those systems, into those bad habits that they had that got them to jail in the first place. And so I think it's not just about who should go through the program, it's when you go through it, going through it with an open mind and an open perspective of what you potentially are going to need to alter in your organization to be able to best serve your community, particularly the students and the workforce that you're trying to build.
Such awesome points, and love that you highlighted those that have been impacted by the criminal justice system. An unplanned plug for our colleagues in Kentucky, and some of the incredible work that they're doing with their Department of Corrections, the partnerships that they've had in the equine industry and are trying to expand into other industries. It's been incredible to see just how transformative they're able to take what was a small program and really expand it to something meaningful, in which many people have now been hired directly from getting out of the criminal justice system to try to help with those recidivism rates. So that's wonderful to hear, and that you all are focusing on that in Texas as well. So thanks for that, Priscilla. So this next question is probably mostly best geared for Corey, but our colleague from Colorado asks, what does it look like for a host organization to provide support for an employer collaborative? So what's kind of the staffing structure, any best practices that you can share to be a successful host organization?
Yes, so it is a lift. So I think if you look at the TPM, if you look at their curriculum, they recommend one staff person for every 2 collaboratives. I think that's a full-time working on that. That is not what we have here. So you are able to do it with less. But in my personal opinion, I feel like I could do a lot more if that was the only thing that I did. But those of you in chamber world and in most community organizations, that's not as easy as you think. But you can certainly get started that way. But you're spending your time really doing a lot of convening. When it comes to the data collection, you're setting up the surveys, collecting that information when they get back, putting it in a presentable form. So it's a lot of meeting time. I wouldn't say there's a lot of dollars being spent other than time. So it's really just the time of the employee, the staff person who's running that. I think when you get into the implementation of what the employers and the educators have come up with, there could potentially be a lot of different costs there. And so that's part of your curriculum, is really looking at what you want to do and how you want to fund that. If you want to charge employers, you can, you don't have to. There's a lot of different ways and a lot of different examples of different collaboratives around the country who've done it. And so, a lot of them are grant funded to start with. So you've got seed funding to get it off the ground. There's a lot of ways to do it, but I would say kind of the rule of thumb is one staff person for every 2 collaboratives.
That seems like a great rule of thumb. Looks a little bit different all across the country, but as Corey said, there is time, most significantly time that is involved with overseeing these collaboratives. So it looks like I've got one question for each of you, and then I'll do a lightning round last question. But Sonia, this next one's for you. What does the makeup of your collaborative look like? Can big employers and small employers participate in the same collaborative?
Absolutely. I think we, as the largest healthcare employer in our region, I think we also have the smallest healthcare employer in the region. So I think what the reoccurring theme is that we all are stressed and have the pressure of workforce. So definitely, I don't think the size matters. I think that it's just important for you to come with an open mind, as we've all talked about today, to see how we can address and go through the talent pipeline to make it better for us. So, I don't think the size matters. Currently, our collaborative, I believe, has 7 employers in our region, which is a pretty sizable number for us in our region, and all very participative, all very interactive and engaging in the process. So we're just blessed. We feel like we've made a lot of progress, and the neat thing is, even though I said it started, several years ago, we're still meeting and still talking about it. So it seems like we may change positions. I know we talked about not just registered nurses, but certified nurse aides. So we may change our focus and direction a little bit, but we're still getting together. That's the most important.
No, it's always exciting to see a collaborative that has been through the process and can say, okay, our pipeline is actually in a good place. We can now apply the same process, being, now smarter about the strategies and know how to do it, maybe even a little bit faster, to other positions that are experiencing challenges. So it's great to see that you all have been able to be nimble and kind of adjust where needed. So I think that that's a really great representation of continuous improvement and how the framework can be applied, not just to one position, but to multiple positions within an industry. Priscilla, for you, what happens? You're a great example for this, given that you were for the very first cohort 7 years ago. How the Academy has changed since. But it's always great to see that our partners remain engaged with us after they finish a training. What does post-Academy training look like? How do you stay engaged with the TPM community?
I was gonna say keep in touch with Jamie, because she's gonna bring you in. No, all kidding aside, I think it's just staying connected to former colleagues and partners. I think keeping up with the materials. I mean, the U.S. Chamber has plenty of materials that they put out, updates. All of that is incredibly useful in terms of what we're doing every day. I know here at Alamo colleges, but certainly information that I know is beneficial for some of the partners that I work with. But you've already talked about community-based organizations like a Goodwill Industries or our ISD partners. We haven't talked a lot about them, but everything that we do, whether it's for adult learners, for community college students, really needs to be broken down and brought down to ISD. So I think one of the things that I would tell you is why keeping in touch with and staying engaged with all of our U.S. Chamber colleagues and going to the conferences and staying abreast of all the materials is how do we also translate some of that material and maybe use it in such a way that it goes down to our K through 12 partners as well. That is sort of the feed, again, that first part of that feeding pipeline for talent. And a lot of times they don't get brought into the fold right away or even at all. And that's something I know we are looking at more closely here in San Antonio, is that how do we better inform them and train them and educate them on TPM, so that they can use those skill sets, the learnings, in the deployment of their own programming that then ties in nicely with our program, that then ties in nicely, obviously, with what the employers are looking for.
We love that, and we encourage you to stay a part of the TPM Mafia, as Nikki likes to say, for as long as you're willing. It's been great when our colleagues, even if they have changed to a different organization or have a different perspective, remain engaged with us, because then they bring in this really rich and valuable perspective to have maybe learned the framework in one context, but are going to apply it in a different context like Priscilla is now. So really grateful for your continued leadership and partnership. So my last question before we close out for the day for you all is, what is your advice for those on the call in terms of what their potential next step is? What's your best advice? Corey, let's start with you this time.
I just have to say, just do it. I mean, I know it's cliche, but I just remember going through the academy, and there is so much to know and so much to learn. But I just had to set a date and say, we're going to go for it. I'm not going to be 100% ready, but that's okay. And you can do the same. There are so many people to support you. There's no wrong answers, but don't wait for everything to be perfect. Just do it.
I love that. How about for you, Sonia?
I would just say, I will echo that. Don't be hesitant. Jump in head first. Working together has been awesome. And the network opportunities with all of our partners have been unbelievable. So thankful.
We're glad to hear it. We're glad to hear it. Priscilla.
I completely agree. And I think also join. And if you don't believe that you are the right convener, like whatever it is, I mean, if you feel like, you know what, I maybe am not one of these roles, but I maybe, or the best person for one of those roles, but I know somebody who will be, do it anyway so that you can get informed and provide that information to somebody else or another organization or another person on your team who might then be able to come in and help and learn and then engage in that work. I think that's one of the things that we want perfection. And as you've heard from my colleagues, like, don't let achieving good, let perfection, help impede you from achieving good. And so that's the thing that I would tell you. Like, if you're interested, sign up, get engaged. And if you think that somebody else midway through is the best person for that work, then get them engaged as soon as you can so that they can achieve that in your community.
Well, I knew we were in for a good discussion with the three of you. So grateful for your time. So thank you so much for your willingness. For those of you who have stuck with us, we are offering a special promotional code that will be popped in the chat, but it's welcome SP23. So that will give you $300 off of your enrollment into TPM Co Lab. So we're very excited for the next generation of TPM leaders to join us. You can scan the QR code, and I know that my colleagues have put the information in the chat, but we look forward to hearing from you. Please let us know if you have any questions. But thank you again to our partners for their time today, and we look forward to the next TPM journey with all of you. Take care.